We can add a to-do, but when we refresh the page, we see some content that's going to make the user think that they have no to-dos created. And overall, it's kind of a goofy experience to have content kind of flipping in and flipping out. So we're going to solve this issue by fading in our list component when our data is loaded, rather than always showing. The question becomes, well, how do we know when our Firebase data has actually been loaded? Luckily, our Firebase object emits an event whenever the data has been loaded. So we're going to make use of this event inside of app.jsx. We're going to refactor our component will mount method and just save off a reference to the Firebase object. So we'll say fb equals new Firebase root URL, excuse me, items. I guess I could have just copy pasted it, but there you go. So this is now going to be just FB for Firebase, and we'll say this is where we're going to bind our event handler. So when Firebase emits the value event, we're going to say this.handle data loaded. So internally, we have this on method that allows us to listen to any event, and it just so happens that Firebase has an event called value. Firebase emits value as soon as it sees data flow in, as soon as it gets some data from the server. The function that we pass it will get called whenever value is triggered. So now we'll go ahead and flesh out handle data loaded. So again, we know that whatever code is inside of here is going to get called when our Firebase data has been loaded. So the goal of this is to make sure that we're not showing the list of items or anything having to do with the list or anything that might make content all of a sudden pop up on the page until our data has successfully been loaded. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to use, as usual, we're going to use a flag placed on state. So when our component first renders, we're going to say loaded false. In other words, my data has not yet been loaded. When our data has loaded, which is going to be inside of our event handler, we'll say this.setState loaded true. Because yes, at this point in time, our data has been loaded. It's now safe to show content on the page. Okay, now you might think, well, let's just go ahead and wrap our data in here, or wrap this element with this loaded flag, and only when loaded is true will we show our list. We're going to do something just a little bit more elegant in this case, something that's going to make our app a little bit more pretty. Let's go ahead and save really quick, and you'll notice that our app's going to reload, and nothing's changed yet because we haven't actually made use of the loaded flag. So let's now make use of loaded. We're going to make sure that stuff kind of fades into existence by using CSS. So let's flip over to index.html. And normally in any sizable application, right now we're really going to break the rules. In any sizable application, we would have our own CSS page, so a distinct CSS file. Since we're just going to be adding a handful of styles for this project, we're just going to put all of our styling into a simple style tag inside of our head of our index.html file. So we'll say content, and I'll show you where we're going to implement these classes in just a second, but let's just put the styling in for right now. So we'll give this an opacity of 0, and then we're going to define a transition opacity 1 second ease in, and then we'll do a second rule, loaded opacity 1. Okay, so the thought process here is that we are going to wrap our list element with the class content. Whenever the list has the class content, it will have an opacity of 0. And opacity is talking about whether or not basically the fade of the item. So it kind of fades it out. With an opacity of 0, the item will be completely invisible, whereas with an opacity of 1, it will be 100% visible. By defining a transition property, we say any element that has class content, that has its opacity changed, we want that change to occur over the duration of 1 second as opposed to instantly. So it's going to transition the opacity over 1 second using a particular animation called ease in. So it's going to ease in the animation as opposed to a linear animation. So let's save our index.html file, and now we need to go back over and decide where to place the class content and loaded. And obviously we're going to want to put those classes around our list element right here. So let's wrap our list with a new div. And we'll fill out our class name in just a second. For right now, let's get everything set up. Okay, great. So we know that we always want to have the class content, right? Let's save this and reload our file. Make sure you hard reload since we edited our styles. And now you'll notice, well, we have nothing on the page because the only class we have applied is content, which applies an opacity of 0. So our list is completely invisible. Only when this div has, in addition to content, has class loaded will our list be visible. And we want this element to have class visible only when loaded on our state is true. So we're going to use a ternary expression in here. We'll say, let's put in a brace because we're going to add a JavaScript expression here. So we'll say, I want this element to have class content plus this .state.loaded or empty string. So we've used this kind of style a couple times now. We've got a ternary expression. So if loaded is true, we'll get class loaded. If loaded is false, we'll get empty string. There's one more thing. Let's make sure that we put a space after content because we're joining two strings together here. And we need a space between the word content and the word loaded. All right, so let's give this a shot. We're going to save, flip back over. And all right, that looks pretty good. We get a nice fade in of our content. And you'll notice that since we didn't change the opacity, we didn't make our list visible until the data has loaded, we didn't see that initial message that said, hey, please add some to-dos to get started. Let's refresh it again, and all right, looks pretty good. So the next section, we're going to start by fleshing out our individual to-do items.